Speaker.
All right, welcome to Climate 101. So first, what's going on in Arizona? If you read the paper, well, the water problem is now the governor is thinking about going to Mexico and getting a desalination plant going and water back up here. That's one of the things. People are looking for energy sources to plug in their electric cars. Locally, we have mines that are wanting to put in out in our beautiful mountains. So what can we do individually? What can the church do? Should we put solar in our church? These are all questions that are just right out there where we are. And I think we just have the best person to talk about this. Connie Williams is a local client scientist, and she's just linked to doing things wherever she is about climate. She's going to take us through 4 major climate trends and how they will impact us in the future. And she will address things that we can do to move our own families toward the new low carbon society. Connie is a retired science teacher, environmental educator. In 2013, she trained in Chicago to become a representative for Climate Reality, an internal climate change education organization. She and Connie Aglione co-facilitated a climate focus group for Alliance for Action. She taught an OLLI climate course for several years and has given talks about climate and Arizona's water challenges to groups like Rotary, American Association of University Women, Arizona Faith, and several Democratic clubs. She lives in Rio Rico, and she organizes a weekly food distribution of rescued produce, is on the board of Anza Trail Coalition as the chairperson of the 2 Box Nature Center Youth Education Committee. So Connie is really special because she doesn't just talk, she puts her money where her mouth is. So I'm really happy to introduce Connie Williams.
Well, I am just delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this, and I have enjoyed working with Marjorie for many years now, and I've been very much looking forward to working with the group of United Methodist Women. I was raised as a Methodist in a really outstanding little church in Page, Arizona, and I am going to share my screen here. There we go. Okay. The science behind climate change is pretty interesting. I really like talking about it, but frankly, I think we are now at a place where we need some practical advice about dealing with it. Today, what we're going to do is focus on climate trends that we're already experiencing and spend a little bit more time looking at ways to cope. If you've seen the movie that I just watched on Netflix called Don't Look Up, you probably already have a pretty good idea about why we've known about this for so long, but we haven't made any real progress towards dealing with it at a national level. So, and we will talk about the actions that we can take. Now, what we've got here is slide saying, quoting Barack Obama saying, climate change is no longer some far off problem. It's happening here and it's happening now. Well, carbon dioxide and its carbon building up in the atmosphere as we burn fossil fuels, that's causing the climate to warm. Carbon dioxide reached 419 parts per million last year. This year, we reached, in pre-industrial, before the combustion engine was invented, we were at 280 parts per million. You can see that's quite a big jump. Unfortunately, maximum safe yield is only at 430 parts per million. That's only 11 more parts per million. Just for an idea of the scale of the problem, when I first started teaching about climate change, in 2013, we were at 395 parts per million. So we've gone up 25 parts per million just in those 8 or 9 years. So this is definitely a trend. Carbon dioxide is increasing, and that is the heart of the problem. What I hope to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about how you can protect yourself and your family. How can we help our communities and others to deal with the impacts, some of which are pretty severe? And then, of course, we're still working to slow the rate of change. So we'll be talking about these trends. The first one I want to talk about is the trend of increasing heat. If you were here, maybe if you weren't, you were paying attention to what was going on down here. In June, we had extreme heat here. I'm frankly still grieving about it. In Rio Rico, we had 2 weeks of over 110 degree temperatures, including 3 consecutive days of 116 degrees. And it was right during the quail hatching season. Now, I normally see 10, 12, 15 families of quail bring their babies into my backyard as they're hatching, and then they keep visiting throughout the year. None of these families survived that heat, and now my backyard is empty. But even worse than that was a month later in British Columbia, of all places, they had a period of 121 degrees heat. These people do not have air conditioning. Nearly 600 people died, and this was declared virtually impossible without global warming. Now, the earth is getting hotter. That is definitely a trend. This goes from 1851 here down to 2020. Turns out 2021, I just heard this recently, kind of fits in about here. It's not hotter than 2020, although certainly in some places it was. But you can see the trajectory. The trend is to continue to get hot. We need to think about that in our own lives. The last decade was the hottest in 125,000 years. Please pay close attention to the heat index. This is National Weather Service. You can pull this off the internet. It is something that takes both temperature and humidity into consideration. And this is important because human bodies build up heat on the inside, and we need to be able to sweat in order to cool off that, pull away that heat. And we can't do it if there's, a high temperature combined with some humidity. Now you can see the yellow is caution, extreme caution, this gold bit, and then danger and extreme danger. I want to talk about 105 and remarkably 165, which I don't even know where that fits on the chart. But you can see 105 here in a couple of different places. 98 degrees with only 48% humidity gives you that. Or even just 86 degrees if you've got higher humidity. So this is kind of it's very much a danger area if you have a job, or you're an athlete, or if you have a job that you work outside, or even just being outside too long. And what Climate Central has projected now is that in 2000, we had 121 days. That's what, about 4 months of these heat index above 105 degrees in Phoenix. By 2050, that will be up to 5 months. That means there are many jobs that cannot be done now for much longer. It was 2015 that in a place in Iran reached 165 degrees heat index. That is that means that the temperature was really high and the humidity was really high. If you do not have air conditioning, you cannot survive in that. And the number of extremely hot days and nights in the Middle East and North Africa has already approximately doubled since the 1970s. And we'll talk again about that area of the world when we talk about drought. India is another country where summer heat, they have the monsoons, the humidity and the heat are both high. It may soon be a place where people need to leave in order to live. June 2018, because what we're seeing, another trend we're seeing is that the heat is growing faster at night than it is in the daytime. So here's Oman. This was June 2018. Their nighttime low, which actually nighttime low is first thing and early in the morning, just before the sun comes up. So their coolest, normally coolest part of the day was almost 109 degrees. Now that's a temperature. I don't know what the heat index was, but I can see just looking at this, this is Oman and there's sea out there. So you know this was humid. If their air conditioner did not work, this whole community would have died. As I said, another trend is that the overnight warming of the nighttime temperatures are coming up faster than daytime temperatures. And it's a little horrifying to see Arizona's third on the list. We're the same. Basically, we've increased almost 3 degrees, not quite. Fahrenheit, that's actually the same amount as California, New Mexico, Nevada. But that is another concern for us. And of course, all last May and June, there were a number of articles in the Daily Star and the New York Times saying a new deadly risk for cities in summer are power failures, like California has been having. And one of the things that they pointed out was that in each of the cities that they studied, they did have these big public cooling centers, but they could accommodate no more than 2% of a given city's population. Who's most vulnerable to this? Well, the poor and the homeless, of course, they don't have access to air conditioning. The elderly, little kids and babies. If cardiac patients, heart patients, and lung patients, respiratory conditions are particularly sensitive to this, and of course, the mentally ill. So what do? So we know about the extreme heat. We know that it's only going to get worse, even if we do everything that we possibly can. Unfortunately, this is with us for a while. So my advice, and here's something I want to suggest for all of you. That chat feature on your, just kind of hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen and you'll see chat. If you think of other things that you know that you would like to add to this conversation, would you please put them in chat to everybody? And then when we're done with my talk part, then we'll go back through chat, because I bet some of you have got some other things. I picked out some of my favorites, but there's other things you may want to talk about. So take those heat warnings seriously when you hear about them on the news, on TV, and particularly pay close attention to the heat index. You may even want to get your own copy of it. Protect yourself at home. Consider if it's possible to put thicker insulation around your house, more efficient air conditioning system, energy efficient windows. And if you don't have, nice little project might be to plant a couple of trees on the west side of your house to keep or even put a little ramada or a little shade roof over the west side of your house to keep your house from getting so hot in the late afternoon. Make a plan for what you will do in case of a possible power failure. And there's a really good little source for that. This is at the EPA, and it's a little how to beat the heat sort of guidebook. Yeah, I thought I had some pretty good suggestions. Okay, we're kind of on a time thing, so we are going to move right along here and move into the trend of increasing drought. Now, this was in June when we were having that big heat wave. It had been building for a number of years. This drought started in 2000, but you can see the Four Corners states, Nevada, California, and this is where 40% of Arizona's water comes from, are these Colorado River compact states. This dark brick red color is it's called exceptional drought, the worst drought color they have. And we were pretty much all in it. Now, we did have some good rain this summer in Arizona, but you can see that any color on this map or this map is some level of drought, except the Great Lakes, of course, but all those oranges and yellows and reds, this compared to this means that we're not as severe, but the drought across the United States is expanding. Scientists are calling this a mega drought because it started 21 years ago. Some of you have studied a little bit of Arizona history and know that the Anasazi who were here long time ago, they had to leave because of a drought that lasted for about 20 years in the 1200s. We are worse than that drought already. Scientists describe it as a hot mega drought. That means that not only do we not have rainfall, but we have these high temperatures, and that literally pulls any water that's left in the soil out. So you can have a rain one day and a week later, you couldn't tell it because it's so dry. Of course, if you live here, you know that, right? Just to kind of look ahead at where this trend will take us, assuming nothing really gets done about it. So this is the end of the century. And I'd like to call your attention to a couple places. One here is Central America and Mexico. This is kind of interesting. This is the heartland. This is big wheat and corn belt area. That down here is the extremest of droughts, this kind of pink area. Interestingly enough, the Four Corners were in trouble, but these areas are even worse, these dark purple areas. And I also want to call your attention to this area over here. This is the Middle East. That's Turkey. Syria's up here. Even across to Portugal, the area around the Mediterranean. The projection for this is to get extremely dry. Well, we're already seeing some signs that that is beginning already. This was from 2021. Here it is. This is that same area around the Black Sea. This is Turkey. They are having another one of those really severe droughts. Connie Aglione, my friend and partner in talking about climate change, she went to visit Greece, and they were very worried because Greece over here was having huge fires as a result of their heat and drought. But remember, I also talked about Mexico and Central America. This is particularly Central America. There's 45 million people. Half of them live rurally on these subsistence farms, most of them well below the poverty level. And they have had climate impacts that we need to know about. In 2009, they had a drought with major agricultural impacts. The next year, they had a really bad rainstorm, followed by an extended dry. Then the next year, they had another one of these extended torrential rains. It washes out plants, it washes away topsoil. 2014 through 18, they had an extended drought. In 2018, they had 5 years with, this period here were 5 years without any crop production. And in 2020, they were hit with 2 major hurricanes. These are all climate related impacts because the trend means they're happening more frequently. These people can't survive here. They're becoming refugees into the United States. This is an issue we are all going to have to deal with and perhaps needs some support. Well, it does need some support. I just want to kind of bring this in here. There was an Oxfam study in 2014. I've seen indications that this has not changed. The richest 10% of the people globally are responsible for 49% of all the carbon emissions. Now, the richest 10%, we think, whoa, I'd like to be the richest 10%, but we're it. If you're living on $38,000 or more a year, you're in that richest 10%. If you're just under 38,000 though, that's the next, what is this, 68%. The carbon emissions are only from the top 20% of the people. The poorest 50% are down here altogether, just contributing 10%. No one can do anything about climate change if the richest 10% don't make some changes. And we hear a lot about how China, oh, terrible China it's just carbon pollution is really awful. And frankly, it is. But when you look at it per capita, Their carbon pollution per person, because remember, they've got a huge population they're trying to bring out of poverty. It's less than half of ours per person. Once again, if United States, Australia, and Canada don't do what they need to do, we cannot solve this problem. Now, I did a little looking around to see what was being done by the United Methodist Church, because I already kind of knew that they were involved in this creation justice movement, which is pretty awesome. But I also found this, the new mission area, climate refugees. I couldn't support that more. Currently, there are over 26 million refugees worldwide, and half of them are kids under the age of 18. A quarter of them are from that Syrian uprising. Remember, I showed you the stuff around Turkey? Well, Syria's on the kind of that area. And in 2010, they had a really bad drought for several years. It caused food prices to spike because they just could not farm, and they ended up moving into cities. They had to kill off their cattle. They had to just abandon their farms. They moved into cities, and of course, just like is happening in Central America, these innocent, poor subsistence farmers moving in are just fair game for the criminals and the gangs and anybody that is, doing bad stuff. Really prey on these people. So they end up leaving and they end up becoming one of these refugees. Also, 1 in 10 of them is from Afghanistan. It's not just the conflict. Afghanistan has had really extreme downpours and mudslides that kind of accompany a lot of these extreme downpours. Now, my own charitable giving includes, and if you may already be doing this, but if you don't, I'd like to recommend it to you. I give to Doctors Without Borders. I give to UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Program, and I give to the Red Cross, because the suffering that these people must be enduring. As I get up in the morning in my heated house and I think, oh, it's cold and I'm kind of uncomfortable, I think how awful it must be to be living in a tent somewhere, if you've got a tent. Okay, and we're just going to keep moving on here with another trend, and that is more fires. And there's a reason that I've got fires right after we've talked about heat and drought. There was an extreme fire season in Europe this year because they'd been experiencing heat and drought too. This line right here is the average of all the fires from 2008 to 2020. You can see the difference in 2021. Even by August, they had far exceeded the other average. And of course, the whole country breathing wildfire smoke. This was in July 2021, but we have been breathing wildfire smoke for a couple of years now. That drought and all this excessive heat is creating the conditions so that even more of our forests are burning. And it's not just us, and it's not just Europe. The world is grappling with massive fires. This is a serious concern. As we said, heat and drought both contribute. Hotter years have more fires, so the fires are responding to this increase in temperatures. The last 10 years, the hottest recorded. Now, so trying to figure out what to tell you about fire risk, because we here in Southern Arizona, it's not like Northern California or Colorado where there's all these big trees around. I've gone out and cleared a perimeter from the weeds that all grew last summer around my house, but I kept on kind of looking to see what I might be able to tell you, and found an interesting article from AARP. They said that sea level rise, flooding, and fire all create costs for insurers that they will pass along to everyone. Yes, they said if you live in a flood zone, your cost of insurance is going to go way up. But they said everybody is going to be helping to pay these costs. And so what their recommendation was, shop assertively for insurance. consider a policy with higher deductibles if you want to lower your premiums. And they suggested possibly updating your roof could also reduce your insurance rates. Now, if you have, you know, some of you I know are winter visitors, if you live at home, someplace and you're surrounded by burnable trees, and you want to add to either drought or fire or heat, I just want to remind you that the chat down there, just click on it, and to everybody, and go ahead and feel free to add ideas here or just things to talk about. Okay, another extreme we're going to talk about is the weather. This has probably got our attention as much as anything. And a key fact to know about the weather, because this contributes to all of it, is that 93% of the extra heat that we're getting from burning greenhouse gases ends up being absorbed by the oceans, and the oceans are getting hotter. They set a new record the last few years of well, you can see now this actually was 2020. I couldn't find one for 2021 because it was so new, but it set a new official confirmation that we set a new record. So the number or the line here is going to be higher. You can see the trend. The trend was pretty cold oceans getting gradually warmer until now they are considerably more warm. And why does this matter? Well, as the oceans warm, they evaporate more moisture. And as our air warms, warmer air can hold a lot more water vapor. And there's already almost 5% more water vapor over the oceans than there was 30 years ago. And the thing is, it doesn't say all nicely distributed. The winds blow it around, and you end up with these big concentrations of that moisture. This is what's called an atmospheric river. Now, the Pacific Northwest has been talking about atmospheric rivers this winter, and late last fall, they've had some pretty big periods of rain. But this was a pretty interesting one too. This was February of 2017. California had been so dry, they were rationing their water supplies to people. I have family in California, and they could not water their plants outside. They had to just watch them die. And then in February, all of a sudden, they had this atmospheric river. They had 4 or 5 days of heavy rain. They had the mudslides that go with heavy rain like that, and nearly broke one of their dams. It became so full. So atmospheric rivers. So the rainstorms and the snowstorms are getting bigger and more intense. That foot we were talking about just before the program started, the foot of snow in DC, probably relates somewhat to that. There's more water in the atmosphere, so there's bigger and more frequent flooding. We saw this year, and this is a small fraction of what was actually there, but if you were watching the news in Europe, they were having really unusual, very massive floods. Germany was particularly hard hit, Poland, Belgium. But I've been watching this. China has really severe rainfall events every year for the last few years that I've been paying attention. But this particular one really caught my eye. They've had over 25 inches fell in 24 hours. That is really shocking. And this one down here, this was Brazil in 2020, in May, 450,000 people affected. These are huge events, but just in case you're thinking they're all happening someplace else, because we live in a desert. This was a picture, man pulls two from a car in flooded Tucson Street. We can still, even here in the desert, get these massive flooding events. And so now I need to talk about one more piece of this. Extreme, actually, there's going to be another piece too, but one more piece that's important in understanding extreme weather. First, it's the oceans are warming, but then the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, are warming faster than the rest of the planet. And this we call Arctic amplification. Now, one of the real obvious things that would happen is if you're getting the poles warming faster, that the ice up there would start to melt. And yes, indeed, we are losing 1.2 trillion tons of ice each year because of the warming that's happening there. And there's also a big worry about there's more warming in the oceans, in the Southern Ocean and the Atlantic. And the ice in Antarctic, down in the South Pole, a lot of that is floating on the ocean. And as that ocean warms, it begins to melt that ice, and it destabilizes those ice shelves. All of this contributes to sea level rise. Most of the planet's people live in big cities along the coast. That will displace them. That is a big concern. Okay, and here's the third one. The warming poles are, this one's still related to Arctic amplification, if I got you confused there. The warming poles also change the behavior of the jet stream. So it's all connected, this wacky jet stream. And here's what happens. The jet stream gets really loopy like this. It should just be a nice, big, gentle wave across about the middle of the northern hemisphere for us. But what happens is you get these big loops and it traps a storm inside, and that's what leads to historic flooding. I'm going to recommend this for you, and I'll try to remember to put it in chat myself when we get done. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It is darling little YouTube video. It's only, what, 6 minutes long, and it's artistically done. I highly recommend it. But they explain this whole jet stream issue. Basically, the way it works is our atmosphere, which is made of gases, is not uniformly thick around the planet. Because gases expand when they're hot, it's actually thicker, higher, if you will, over the equator than it is over the poles, where the gases contract when it's cooler. That difference is what drives the energy, gives energy to the jet stream and keeps it moving. Now, what happens is, as you have the gases over the poles warming up, they begin to increase, and the difference is not as big here as it used to be. And so what happens is the path, it makes the jet stream really loopy. The speed, sometimes the jet stream just stalls out. And the character of the jet stream all are changed because of this. And so what happens is, their example here was, we might in the Southwest be having what would have been a week or 2 weeks of dry period. It now turns into an extended dry period, like we had not this last summer, but the summer before, where we had almost no rain all summer. That drought, if it's a rain event, it can just sit in one place and dump. Same thing with snow. Weather patterns are getting stuck as climate changes the jet stream. And I want to just talk briefly. I've been following hurricanes now for a while, so I've got a lot of information, lives lost, and the cost to us. This last hurricane season, 4 major Category 3 or greater hurricanes. Now, of course, the highest lives lost was Hurricane Irma back in 2017. That was 265 billion. These things are very costly. But we're going to talk here, we're going to talk about Michael, and I'm going to pull back into Harvey, which were 2017 and 18. So this is the sea surface temperature, a word anomaly that's used by climate scientists. Anomaly is when you look at the temperature here, right here at a specific time, at a specific place, and you compare it to the temperatures at that specific place over the last however many years. In this case, the baseline is 61 to 1990. So this is an anomaly, and what this tells us that right here along the Florida Panhandle in the Gulf of Mexico, that water was somewhere here around 6 degrees centigrade. So that makes it probably 12, 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than it normally would. And here's what happens. Remember, warmer air and sea surface temperatures. And remember, we just saw that sea surface temperature was very warm. That adds more energy to whatever storm system. More energy in the system creates a stronger storm. Well, we were looking at Michael, and Hurricane Michael was mostly about wind. It had maximum sustained winds of 161 miles per hour. The buildings which were built, Florida has kind of refused to acknowledge climate change, and their building codes reflect it. You can see buildings that were just leveled by the wind. Now, this was the strongest hurricane on record to make landfall in the Florida Panhandle. It was a pretty serious event. Now, we already learned some things. We already learned warmer oceans increase evaporation, and warmer air holds more water vapor. So now when we start putting this together with stronger storms, more water vapor in the air, and this weakened jet stream that isn't pushing systems away as fast, we get what happened with Hurricane Harvey in the Houston area. The hurricane moved onto land, parked itself over Houston, and just sat and dumped rain. It was a 1 in 25,000 year event, and some nearby areas, it was a 1 in 500,000 year event. Now, the way they figure this is just in probabilities, okay? And these numbers are going to change because the probability of this happening is much more likely than it was based off the records they were looking at before. That is a trend. And of course, all of this is happening when in a time of COVID. So imagine all the challenges of being in some sort of a shelter, if you're lucky enough to have a shelter, but being there with people who are very likely infected with COVID. Munich Re, Swiss Re, both of them, what they do is they're a company that insures insurance companies. And so what they've done is they've been following the weather-related natural catastrophes. This little chart is 1980 to 2018. And the green is the number of storms. And you can see that that's definitely gone up, 2018 in particular. The blue are all the flooding kinds of events. So that's things like flood and landslides. Landslides come with flooding, so they get included in there too. And you can see that compared to the 80s, clear up to here, the 80s, wow, we're 2 or 3 times as many of those big events as there used to be. This is the extreme heat, drought, and fire. In the 80s, you can see what the number looked like, and we're well above that now. So this trend, there's really no end in sight yet. It will continue to get worse. So at this point, we got to say, what can we do to slow the rise of CO2, which is contributing to it? There's 3 big areas, and we'll talk a little bit more towards the end about a few more things you can do. And by the way, if you want to add anything into chat, don't forget. But the 3 big areas are transportation. That's a real hard one to fight. Energy efficiency, and another one is agriculture. All 3 of those we're not making very much progress on as a kind of globally, but particularly as a nation. Well, transportation is really tough for us. I know in Rio Rico, where I live, and in Green Valley, where you live, there just isn't much in the way of public transportation. So it was real hard for me to come up with too much. Electric vehicles are still hard if you got to drive a distance. Like, you know, if it can't make it to Tucson and back, I can't own an electric vehicle. So the best thing that I found to do is just don't go for several days in a row. Combine all those trips unless it's absolutely an emergency, and then you can still combine trips, or maybe take a friend with you who also needs to shop. Probably fly less. We don't need multiple flights probably every year if you can help not doing that. In terms of energy efficiency, there are some things you can do in your house. And I did an energy efficiency change in my own house, upgrade in my own house. And I did spend some money for it. But the wonderful thing about that was it wasn't as expensive as I feared. And I actually cut my electric bill. I have an all electric house. I cut my electric bill 30% and I'm actually more comfortable. So I highly recommend that, but that's pricey. So electricity vampires, you know, your electric toothbrush, when it's plugged in, that little charger thing, when it's plugged in, it's drawing electricity even though it's not doing anything. Our phone chargers, for me, I'm having trouble remembering to turn my printer off every night. Stereo components, TVs. One of the things that's recommended is maybe get a power strip you can plug all those things into, and then just click the power strip off at night and click it back on when you're going to use it in the morning. And then the third thing, agriculture, eat less meat. I can remember a time in my life when I probably had meat twice a day, lunch and dinner, you know, a sandwich and then dinner. And then I probably had eggs and I might have had bacon for breakfast. I don't do that anymore. What they recommend is 3 servings per week of meat, and that could reduce your greenhouse footprint, your carbon footprint, by over 500 pounds of greenhouse gases per person that made that shift every year. So that is, and the other thing I might say, particularly in Arizona, is that cows use a huge, just an ungodly amount of water. And it's not just when they're a cow, but it's all the alfalfa that has to be irrigated with our groundwater to feed them. So this is one more thing you can do. So that's kind of the bad news. We've got some good news, though. We have the ability to turn this around. It's, you know, it's a bit of a challenge right now, but I honestly think that this is not going to be something people are going to find so odious. And I'm suspecting a lot of you ladies are already doing a lot of things. So I'm talking the nation as a whole. US wind capacity between 2010 and 2020 went up 166%, saving 89 million tons of CO2 emissions. That's huge. And here's the other one. This is the part that surprised me. It reduced water use by about 103 billion gallons compared to fossil fuel energy production. So that's cool. I think we all know 1976, it cost $79 per watt to generate 1 watt of electricity. And it's now at 2018, it was down to 28 cents. So going solar makes a lot of sense. You might wonder why Arizona hasn't adopted more solar. There are reasons for that. We'll get to in a minute. Not in depth, but we'll mention them. The thing that has been the best are cities. A lot of cities have really stepped up to the plate to make their cities more carbon friendly, low carbon cities, whatever you want to call it. Vancouver, British Columbia, they have 90% renewable electricity already. 250 miles of bike paths and strict green building codes. So they are only building energy efficient buildings. They've got efficient mass transit and ride sharing systems. They've gone heavy into zero waste efforts. I mean, this is a city of the future. This is a low carbon example that we could all look to follow. Here's another one I really like, Denmark. 36% of all commuting is done by bicycle. And here's some mother taking her kid to the babysitters or to work, I don't know. But you can see, I mean, Denmark, it gets cold in Denmark. But what they've discovered is when they got people bicycling is that people are a lot healthier. Their health costs are much lower. And they expect to be carbon neutral in just 3 more years. Bravo for Denmark. Now, we don't have to go a huge distance away to find some pretty good examples. Tucson is done some really awesome things in terms of becoming a sustainable city. There is a little neighborhood development called Savano out in southeast Tucson that is designed as a sustainable community. And there are a lot of good parts of it. But one thing I particularly like, and I think one of the things that would be to our advantage, maybe, to incorporate into the changes we make as we design these low carbon lifestyles. Savano and Tucson, I think in general, have made a real effort to put these little green spaces with seating in communities, in neighborhoods, so that you don't have to go real far to find a place where you can come and sit down and meet people, hang out, you know, maybe read the paper and just be around other people. This is something that a lot of cities were built without paying particular attention to, and they are not very friendly cities. So you may be asking, what can one person possibly do in the face of this pretty dismal news? Well, stop being one person. I love this. This is what it happens if we're all trying to work separately. And I can relate. I'm kind of, in the old days, wasn't really much of a joiner. I'd do my own letter to the editor or send out. And, you know, unfortunately, this problem is so big, it's very easy to pick us off. Organize. If we're working together, our chances of doing something and succeeding are much better. So I'm suggesting actively support climate action justice, creation justice, which is the one that United Methodists are already supporting. I'd like to also call your attention to the one that Connie Aglione and I both very strongly support, which is Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby is very ethical. That was a really important thing to us. Their values are values that we share. They're focused on lobbying Congress to pass a tax or a fee on carbon. And there are a few of those bills out there, but what is particularly impactful about this one is that the fee is a pass-through. It goes straight through government. There's money set aside to administer it, okay? And that's all worked out. Don't get bogged down in that can't happen. That can happen. But then this gets distributed equally to every US citizen. And the impact of it is that the people and the low income people who live in large families, all these people have a much lower carbon footprint than others who are using a lot of carbon. The people that are using a lot of carbon, their costs will go up, and that amount they get back will not cover it. But the people who are on the low end, they will have a little bit of extra money in their pocket to make some changes to their house that will help their house be more energy efficient, or, you know, adjust to this new society. Another thing, of course, it's real important that your opinion is expressed in the ballot box. Support climate-friendly candidates and legislation. You will, I think you probably had Andrea D'Alessandro. I know she was my representative in the Arizona House, and she is not running again next year. So whoever comes in to take her place, please make sure that they have a good, sound background in climate. Help us get out the vote. If there's phone calls that need to be made, whatever it takes. The midterms have very poor turnout. Arizona has special issues. The reason we don't have more solar panels in this state, we should have massive solar arrays. Every place else you go, you see massive arrays. And Arizona's got a few of them, but Arizona Corporation Commission has tried real hard to get that passed, and there are special interests working against them. They need your support in order for this to change. Arizona's water law is another one. We have people coming in from other countries and other states to suck as much of our water, groundwater, as they can, because our water law is not strong. And the person that is currently in charge of the committee that brings that to the floor in Arizona, I think is going to be your representative, Gail Griffin. Watch that person. She will not bring decent water law to the floor. And then talk about climate issues with your family and friends. This is a Yale climate opinion map. They do these a couple times a year. This one's from 2020. They kind of went off on a different tack last year, but I don't think this has changed much. The estimated percent of adults who discuss global warming at least occasionally is only about a third. You can see from this map, the blue represents people who are not talking about it hardly at all. And the darker the blue, the less they are likely to talk about it. This is an issue, and I know exactly why. It's because the old climate deniers made such a fuss whenever anybody brought it up that now people are real hesitant to create friction. But another wonderful little video, it's only 4 minutes long, is called The Secret to Talking About Climate Change. It's just a darling little video. Basically, they say climate's the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. But you need to talk about it, but don't make some common mistakes. Climate change is a really big problem and we've got to do something about it. Does not get people to listen. Better to ask them what they think. I really liked about the fact that you're talking about stories at the beginning. Talking about stories is actually a very, what's your climate story? Have you ever really been in what's the hottest you've ever been in? Or what's the most dangerous extreme weather you've ever been in? Kind of can get the juices flowing and people are telling stories back and forth. They reinforce in this little video that when the other person is talking, even if they say some things like, oh, I know it's a big hoax and that's where you're trying to take me, don't interrupt them. Just listen. What you're trying to do is build trust and help them feel valued and safe. No one will listen to your opinion about climate change until they feel heard by you and valued and safe. Okay, last couple of slides here. Of course, we all need to shrink our own carbon footprint. Moving to a low carbon lifestyle is going to be easier than you think. The areas of greatest concern, we already talked about that: agriculture. Buying grapes from Chile is a very high carbon footprint way to eat grapes, just saying. And we talked about beef. Transportation, harder for us to do something about here, but we do what we can. And anything you can do towards energy efficiency is useful. There is something called climate grief or eco grief. And that is when you really take some of this stuff to heart, it can make you feel helpless. It can make you feel depressed. Trust me, I've dealt with it. And so my sister has dealt with it even worse than I do because she's not doing anything about it. And that's when it's the worst. So do what you can to help and then say, okay, I'm helping. And then that's, I can't fix this all by myself, but I am doing something about it. I totally agree. And I had to laugh because the start of your program today and the end of my program today just go hand in hand. The Look Up and Live poem that was read right at the beginning. Spend more time outside. There is beauty everywhere. We've talked about some trends that are taking its toll on our planet, but what we have, our planet, is still really beautiful. And wouldn't it be a shame if we didn't just appreciate it while we have it? And my recommendation is, I'm not working to fight climate change. I'm working with the focus on becoming the seeds and helping others become the seeds of a new low carbon society. And that's a much more joyful place to be. Practice gratitude. Show your joy. We're building tomorrow and we've got to show our joy so that others see that living a low carbon lifestyle is not a burden. Care for Earth's precious life can bring us great joy. I just have to take this little girl. We used to take these family hikes with kids. We're pandemic. I haven't done it for a couple of years. But this little girl, when she found out we were going to look at bugs, this got a bug jar here. She went, "Ooh, I hate bugs." And this picture was a picture of her absolutely enraptured with whatever is happening here. That's what happens when you get outside. Martin Luther King, talking about a whole different problem, said, "One of the great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, and to remain vigilant and to face the challenge of change." Oh my goodness, prescient. He could have been talking about today. Everything that matters is happening right now in 2022. Stay awake, stay engaged. And now's a good chance for questions and a chance to thank you and a chance for us to see what's in chat. And I've asked Deanne if she'd kind of help me with chat, and also if you've got questions or want to contribute something, down on the down by where your little red leave button is, there is a reaction button. If you click on that, you can see raise hand. So that's one way to do it, but we're okay if you do this too. So feel free to ask questions, and I'm just going to see if we got anything in chat. Let me just do that first. Okay, just a couple things. Here's one from Christine and Chris. Over 4,200 lightning strikes in the Arctic in 2021. Wow, I hadn't heard that. That's interesting. More than twice the number in 2020. They're causing, oh yes, I had heard this. They're causing peat bog fires, which can burn for years because they're underground. Both fires and the melting permafrost are causing massive releases of carbon dioxide. Absolutely true. And into the atmosphere. This results in more warming and more unsettling weather and more lightning. This is what we call a feedback loop. And there's a couple in the Arctic. As we burn fossil fuels, it releases carbon in the atmosphere, which warms the atmosphere, which melts the ice, which releases this methane, which is it's in a couple of different forms. It's in peat is, peat is just dead grass, basically. And as it decomposes, because it can decompose now that it's warm, it's releasing greenhouse gases, quite frankly, just like the garbage we throw into, the organic matter we throw into our landfills. As the warming, as the permafrost melting increases, that increases. And there's also carbon that is methane that is locked up in what are called methane. They're methane crystals, and they start to come out too. Well, all that increases the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere in the Arctic, which in turn warms the Arctic. It is a terrible feedback loop. Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Do you want to add anything to that, Christine, Chris?
No, that's all I know.
Okay, yeah, okay, all right. So that was really good. And she also mentioned, while all electric cars don't have the distance you might need, hybrids do and can get 50 miles per gallon easily. Yes, I drive a hybrid. I don't know if you would know what an FJ Cruiser is, but my favorite car I've ever had in my life was my FJ Cruiser. 17 miles per gallon. I could not justify it. So now I drive a Prius, and I just traveled the length, and I went the length and back in Baja with a friend, and Mexican gas is really expensive. And we were high-fiving it every time we filled up with gas because it wasn't costing us. We weren't having to put much in. Absolutely. I should have said hybrid. So thanks, Chris, for mentioning that. And let's see, I think that's all that's in chat. So who else has got something they'd like to comment on, ask? Okay, I worry about
We're,
I think it's a little after our time anyway, so
Yeah,
oh,
it
this
is.
may be good.
Yeah, it just makes me think we should, we're doing some remodeling in our church that we need to get some solar on our roof.
Yes,
Or
and
some
look
parking.
into, yes, and look into energy efficiency. There may be some things you can do with lights, with digital thermostats. There's a number of things that just plain energy efficiency can do. And then, yeah, investigate the solar panels. I just put them on my house and I put a little storage piece on it. It's been kind of fun to watch it. So, yeah. And I just want to kind of also commend this focus on climate refugees or refugees in general. That is a kind of suffering that I have to feel like I'm doing something at least to alleviate, even if it's just with my money and my turning off lights at night. So, yeah, Chris.
You had said something about some little videos that you would put in chat.
Oh, yes. Let me do that. I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
And you are going to make this video that you've prepared for us accessible, isn't that what you
Yes,
said?
I am. I will. I have a way to edit it, so I'll take the whole business part of the meeting off. So we'll just have we'll just have the program itself. Yeah,
Okay.
but what I'll do is I'll put it on YouTube.
Okay.
So one was the secret to talking about climate change, and I think the other one was what happens in the Arctic. Doesn't stay in the Arctic.
The one about the little kids.
Yeah, that's the secret to talking about climate change.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's the one with all the stick figures on it.
Mhm.
It's a really nice, it's good advice done in a charming way. And they're both, don't we like 5-minute videos? Don't really want to sit for the 30 minutes or an hour that this one is going to end up being.
Thank you so much. Ann, you have a question?
I was just gonna say, if you want to send me the link, I can email
I
it.
will do that. Perfect. I will send you the links. That's the best way to do it of all.
It's just been wonderful. Thank you so much for your knowledge and ideas of what we can do. So, yeah, I just can't thank you enough. So,
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to have been here. You all have been really fun to work with. I enjoyed the rest of the program too, even more than I expected for a little business meeting. You got some good stuff going on.
Thank you so much, Connie, and thank you, Marjorie, for finding her.
Yeah.
We certainly are left with a lot to think about. So thank you
Okay,
all.
I'm turning off the recording.